What's up, everybody, and welcome in to another edition of the Sitdown. As always, if you enjoy this video, please make sure you hit that like button and let me know what you think of the discussion in the comment section below. A little tongue twisted there. If you're new around here and you just haven't done it yet, or you're living on a rock and seeing this video for the first time, I don't know what you're waiting for. Hit that subscribe button below now so you never miss another Sitdown video. If you're watching this interview live on YouTube, welcome in. Please let me know what you think of the interview in the comments in the chat box to the right of the show. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into another very interesting organized crime topic. Before we do that, though, I want to remind you to make sure you check out our friends at Pravada Cigar Club. Now is the greatest time in the world to get some cigars. Get our signature sit-down cigar available now. The link to buy is in the pinned comment of this video. Today, folks, we bring you yet another groundbreaking and exclusive interview. My goal sometimes is to be an investigator, find out where people are, see if they're willing to speak to me. Now, over the last week or so, I was actually approached by someone who had watched my videos, and I started seeing this certain name pop up in my comments, and he had a lot to say about some of the Gotti Gambino videos I was doing. And we ended up emailing. He gave me his phone number and I reached out to him. And he said to me, Jeff, I really want to come on and talk about some things. We were able to figure something out and he's going to join us today. Now, the media will call him John Gotti's adopted son. And let's just be honest, at times, maybe it seemed like that. Here, our guest today, Lewis Kasman, can be seen with really a who's who of the mob, whether it's John Gotti, Jackie Knows, Jojo Carrazzo. There's all sorts of people there. And this is a guy, Lewis Kasman, who definitely has an interesting reputation. We're going to get to the bottom of why the Gotti family today call him some pretty bad names. In the end, though, there's one thing we do know. He very much knew John Gotti, and we welcome him on now. It's Lewis Kasman from an undisclosed location in America. Lewis, how you doing?
Okay, Jeff, how are you?
Good. It's good to see you. I have to say, Lewis, I spoke to a lot of mob guys, a lot of associates, a lot of made members, a lot of police, a lot of people associated with this world. I have to say, I've been very interested in speaking to you. You're a very interesting individual. There's a lot of things that you've told me. You've obviously had the ear of John Gotti for a long period of time. I guess, really, you're a guy who you delivered the eulogy at John Gotti Sr.'s funeral, right? You were given
Yes.
the task of reading the statements from the children of John Gotti. You were a guy who seemingly had his ear at every level. I have to ask you, this photo, what was this? Was this some sort of wedding? What
It,
was this?
it was my brother-in-law's wedding, and in that photo is also Danny Fatico,
Yep.
who was very close to John, and he was also he was on the Gambino payroll uh, as well. Danny was a nice guy, good guy. He used to come to the garment center all the time, visit me,
Now,
and
where's he in this photo?
he's right above me.
Okay, the older
And
guy
yeah,
above you.
the older guy, and next to him is his wife.
And as we know, Danny Fatico was the brother of Carmine Fatico, a guy who, at one point was kind of a quasi mentor, if you will, for John Sr. But, with you and with any time we have a new person on here, I always like to start at the beginning. You were born in 1956. You were in Brooklyn, then in Staten Island. But for most of your childhood, you lived in Long Island. And
Yeah. Yes.
I think the question a lot of people always have with you is, how did you meet John Gotti? When did you meet John Gotti? And you actually met him through a pretty famous attorney, right?
Yes. When we moved to Merrick, I was about 16, 15, 16. And my immediate next door neighbor was Michael Coiro, who was at the time and was till he died, basically. Mike, did 8 years in Raybrook, old law to the door. And who used to come visit Mike all the time was Jeannie Gotti, Angelo, Quack Quack, um, John, Mark Ryder, Herbie Sperling. That was way back when. Obviously, those guys, some have died and some are doing life. So they were always at the house, and we were on the water. Mike had a boat. So we would always be out there, and they'd all be coming over, Jeannie and Angelo and John, mostly Jeannie and Angelo, and John more on a select visit. So that's really how I met John Senior, and how I met Jeannie as well. That's
Now
where it all began.
this is you with Mike Coiro. How old are you in this photo?
I want to say I'm probably about 19 or 20.
Okay. And
Yeah.
that's around, the late 70s.
I would say,
I guess,
yeah.
obviously you become kind of friendly with some of these guys. They obviously know Mike. You're moving around a little bit, but you're not, I guess a lot of people also wonder, like, what was your family like? What kind of people were they?
Well, I came from a broken home, which you hear everybody say, "Oh, I'm from a broken home." Well, I was from a broken home, and then my mother remarried, and she married a guy that was an abusive kind of guy, and so I was always seeking out that father figure, and so that's what basically how this whole thing really began.
So when would you say you started kind of really palling around with some of the Gottis? When did that happen?
Well, back when we were in Merrick, on Sunday mornings we would go to Jeannie's house, and we'd go in. Jeannie most of the time would be sleeping. Mike would wake him up, and then we'd go meet Angelo Quack Quack at the Sherwood Diner, and that became like a ritual. It was Mike, it was me, it was Jeannie, it was Angelo. Once in a while, we brought along this lawyer, Anthony Capitola, who wound up to be a cooperator on the down low. Um, yeah, and that was Capitola was our connection uh, to the D'Amato family. So I guess we'll get into that as we go along. But that's basically how I started to develop my relationship. My whole relationship started with Jeannie. I was on record with Jeannie. That's how this began.
Now, what kind of things were you, at that point? You were, in your, late teens, early 20s. You're
Mhm.
on record. What kind of things are you doing at that time? Because we would know that down the road, you became a very high level individual in the garment district. Were
Well,
you in that? Were you down there at that point?
no, what happened was um, Angelo and Jeannie wanted to come into the garment center. And Mike Coiro, fast forward, couldn't practice law anymore because of the whole Sal Polisi thing. Mike was indicted, and so on and so forth. So Jeannie wanted a way for Mike to have a legitimate living, and also wanted a way for him and Angelo to have a legitimate income. And my stepfather and my soon to be at that point, well, we're moving fast forward, but at that one point in time, that was my stepfather had a business up there for many, many years. And my soon to be father in law had a business up there known as Albee Trimming. And the Lucchese family was going after him with this Lucchese associate, Sidney Lieberman, who was very close to Tommy Gambino. So Angelo and Jeannie were attempting to, squash all that.
So you're saying they're looking to kind of get their friend kind of on his feet due to the fact that he can't practice law. We always know that the mob had particularly Lucchese crime family involvement in the garment district. Tommy Gambino is big down there, and you had kind of had an in already through some of your family. So eventually, why don't you tell me the story about, so you were on record with Gene. How did the transfer to John happen?
Okay, what happened was we're in the garment center, and Tommy is really not doing what he should be doing for Angelo and for Jeannie. And this went on for quite a bit. And I finally went to Jeannie and I said, Jeannie, we're just wasting our time up here. Tommy's just playing with us. He's got basically a mafia family within a mafia family operating up here. Tommy's partners with the Lucchese family, Sidney Lieberman and others. He's got these unions, he's got these associations. And again, no one knows about this. So this is a gang within a gang, a mafia within a mafia.
Right.
And Tommy's been very successful at it. And so I went to Jeannie. I said, we're wasting our time. We definitely should close up. So he says, well, before we do that, he says, let me go with Angelo. Let me give one more conversation with Tommy, stronger. And this was, I believe, on a Friday. And Sunday, he says, we'll meet at the Sherwood Diner. I said, okay. So we go to the Sherwood Diner. Angelo's there. Mike's there. I'm there. Jeannie's there. Jeannie says, listen, and don't forget, all through this time period, I developed, a nice relationship with John. And he says, listen, you have a good relationship with my brother. You need to go talk to him because we can't go any further with Tommy Gambino. We're getting bullshitted and jerked off as well. So I said, he's jerking you off? I mean, I'm like confused here. So you go see my brother and you handle it with him. That's the only way this is going to get done. So I tell Mike, I said, Mike, I'm going to go see John. We'll set this appointment up. So I set the appointment up. And of course, John's very curious what I want to see him with because, I'm on record with Jeannie, but I still had access to John. And so I go see John and we do a walk talk for approximately 3 to 4 hours on 101st Avenue. So finally, John turned and said to me, you got to stop. You're filling my head. You're driving me crazy. I will meet you in the Garment Center on Monday and we'll continue this conversation. I says, fine, very good. And then what happened was we met, John being fashionably late, as he always was. And we met with Tommy Gambino and he wanted to hear what Tommy had to say. We were in Lino's restaurant on 36th Street. And of course, Tommy started blinking, pulling his ring on, his ring off, and he was very nervous. And, John was very nice to Tommy. John liked Tommy Gambino. He really liked him. And we'll get into that another time because that goes to the whole Sammy situation. And he lets Tommy know in no uncertain terms, this is the way it's going to be. You're going to help Lewis. Don't make a mask twice. And this is how it has to be, Tom. You make a good living up here. You got your own little gang up here, a gang within a gang. And let me tell you something, Jeff. That's one thing John Gotti despised. When these skippers would make their own gangs within a gang, he didn't like it. That wasn't John. John was a straight up guy. If he liked you, he liked you. If he didn't like you, you knew he didn't like you. Don't lie to him. Everybody underestimated John, and that's a mistake. Okay, he might not have been a Paul Castellano in the business acumen, but as far as a gangster and a boss, there was nobody like John Gotti, and there'll never be anybody like John Gotti because as this sounds, he was an ethical gangster. If you can understand that, Jeff, he had ethics. If you were in his life and you robbed or you stole or you didn't do what you had to do, you had a problem. Very few, if any, innocence, unrelated to the mob, did John ever hurt. There's a few, and we could get into that because there's explanations for that. But as far as innocence, random innocence, that wasn't John Gotti. That may have been Sammy Gravano, but that wasn't John Gotti.
So and I want to ask you about John kind of as a person, because we obviously know what we read about him and we know what we've heard about him.
Listen,
but I want to talk a little bit. So you obviously would get to become pretty high up in the garment industry. You mentioned Tommy Gambino, working with him. And we obviously know that Tommy Gambino was married to Tommy Lucchese's daughter. So there was always a major connection to the Lucchese crime family. But you mentioned Albie Trimming. You also this is common knowledge. You gave John Gotti a no-show job, didn't you?
It wasn't a no-show job. He came to work.
So he was out there selling
No. Listen, the president of companies don't go out selling. That's what he had me for. Does the president of Purdue Chicken go sell chickens? Does the president of Weston Beef go sell meat? No. You have people that do this for you. The government likes to say, "Oh, it's a no-show job." Well, what did Castellano have? Did he have any real jobs?
So you're saying it was John was no different than any other businessman who invested in a company, and you, from At one point, you managed a lot of John's money. That's correct, right?
I managed a lot of everything for John. Okay, but to get back to this point of this no-show job, that's the government. That's their spin on it. Because if you're a mobster or or a gangster or you're Italian, it's a no-show job. Frankie Russo has the most beautiful place, the catering hall. Is that a no-show job? Frankie works his butt off 7 days a week because he's Italian and connected to Jeannie. Is that a no-show job? That's the
So you're saying the
government. That's
government. You're saying the
yeah.
government picks on Italian people and says,
No. The guy, not the Gotti people. Did you say Italians?
yes.
Yes. The government, listen, the government, look at Phil Basile from all the nightclubs. They targeted him with Henry Hill on a bullshit case. You could go down the line. Look at any of the Lucchese's. Look at any of them. Any family you go to. If they had it, look, Jackie D'Amico, a Crystal Geyser, Hal Irving. They went to school together. Jackie went to work there 2, 3 days a week and got him customers. I saw the customers Jackie got him. Remember, Jackie was very active in the Diamond District. And Jackie also, I introduced Jackie to Leona Helmsley all those years. Jackie was friendly with Pitta, Vito Pitta, who ran the Hotel and Restaurant Workers Union. So Jackie was getting Hal Irving business, but the government and the FBI puts the spin on it. It's a no-show job. And it
You're
wasn't a no-show job.
sure. I understand what you're saying. You're Jewish, correct?
I'm half Jewish, half Italian. My grandfather was on record with the Colombos, which John found out about, and he just burst out laughing. He says, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I says, "I don't know why I didn't tell you." Matter of fact, the guy my grandfather was on record with was very close to John. That's how John found out about it, because a lot of people were talking about me, and it happened to get brought up in John's presence. So
And
it became it
we've
became
seen you
apparent.
in photos. We've seen you in video. You've essentially been in photos with a who's who of the Gambino family, whether it's Jackie Knows, Bobby Borriello, John Senior, whoever. Um, you really start palling around with him towards the mid '80s. I have to ask though, you knew him before the ascension to becoming what the federal government would call boss.
Correct.
We obviously know what happened on December 16th, 1985.
Correct.
I have to ask, where were you that night? What did you hear? What
I
did you think?
Mike Coiro told me, "Come over. You're going to see some big news." So when I got to Mike's house, I said, "What's the big news?" So he says, "We're going to put the TV on." So then I kept pressing Mike, and Mike told me what was going to take place at that point.
So you're saying Mike Coiro knew about this beforehand?
Yes,
Hmm.
yes. Mike
I have to ask.
Coiro, go ahead.
We've heard people, a lot of people say that they knew about it. How many people do you think actually knew about this? Because it seems like it's starting to get a lot of people that are involved in knowing about
No,
this.
nobody knew about it except the people that had to know about it. The
Why
people
would
that
Mike
tell you
Coiro
they,
have to know about it?
well, you got to understand, Mike Coiro wasn't only Jeannie and Angelo's lawyer, he was their best friends. Mike was a stand-up, solid guy. He was not a lawman, but a great showman in the court, and especially in Queens County, where a lot of these cases back then were taking place.
Right.
So Mike was privy to a relation. Remember, Mike Coiro goes back with John Senior when John was maybe 20 years old.
See, and he goes back far before the when John was big time, when they were big time. He had kind of been a friend for years. So that I guess
They
that
were,
does make sense. And he, remember, at this point, it's not a lawyer anymore. He's a quasi, mobster, really.
yeah.
Um,
Well, the government. You see, the government made him a mobster. Mike Coiro was broke. Okay, Jeannie and Angelo basically supported him and John. He couldn't practice. And Mike was the kind of guy, if you were a wise guy or a knockaround guy and you were referred by Jeannie or Angelo or John, he would take your case. And he would say, back then, if you got a $5,000 fee, it was a lot of money. Half of these guys didn't pay him, or they were paying him off. It was on the installment plan. Mike was just a good guy. And it was terrible what happened to Mike. And Mike also represented Dom Cataldo. Dom and him were very, very, very close.
so when you heard about what happened to Paul, what did you think?
I said to Mike, "This is a new day." And then, then it was what it was. John was the boss. Uh, all these kind of stories went around, and you know what? Everybody says, "Oh, how could he do that?" And this or that. Listen, Paul Castellano was a cheap guy. He took money off of everybody. He never let any of his guys make a living. He was disrespectful to Tommy Gambino, which he shouldn't have been. John was the kind of guy. Everybody made a living with John when he was the boss. He always used to tell me, Lewis, don't reach in anybody's pocket. Everybody's got to make a living. And you know what? He was right. He wasn't a Sammy Gravano. Sammy Gravano would take the gold from your teeth. Here's a guy committed 19 murders, and 19 murders that the government agreed to let him say, because they had to convince Judge Leo Glasser that it was only 19 murders. Now, anybody knows he was a serial killer. He was a sociopath. So my point is, there was no better boss than John. He let you live. He let you make a living. He never took nothing off of you. He was fair. As time went by, he realized that a lot of these skippers were not doing the right thing. And he corrected that. And he corrected it firmly. And then things got better.
So once John becomes boss, into the late '80s, you're around him pretty frequently, right? What's
yeah.
What's a normal day like for him and for you, I guess?
Well, it depends what time he gets in. He'd sleep in a little bit. He was tired, and he'd go to he'd wake up, have some orange juice, go to the club. Fat Bob would be there. The barber would come. All the guys would be there on the other side, not on his side. And and that's what he would do. That's how he started his day. Jackie would be there. JoJo was there, and that's how he would start his day.
You mentioned to me at one point that there was a time where John was like really open to speaking to anybody, right? Like if an associate came up and he needed something, hey, give this guy this, give this guy that. You mentioned he was an ethical guy, right? And I don't think anybody would disagree. I mean, when we look up John in the dictionary as far as mobster, he's kind of your definition of one. He was fair, I would think. Some people didn't like him, some people did, but you say he's fair and ethical. Tell us more about that.
Let me tell you about that. There were guys in his crew, and once he became boss, obviously the money situation changed. Every day there was another guy. John, I need money for my lawyer, this and that. This would go on every day. And a lot of times he would refer them to me, or he would refer them to Pete or whatever. And I got to a point where I said to John, this has to stop. I says, it's not right. These guys were approaching you. You're a boss. They're supposed to go to their captain, however it works. And of course I knew how it worked. So he would look at me and laugh. He'd say, you're right. I says, I know I'm right, but it's got to stop. You can't save all these guys. There's a lot of guys, like Tommy Sneak is a good guy. A lot of them really, good guys. But how many times can you keep giving fives and tens and fives and tens? You're not going to he knew he wasn't getting it back. But that's the kind of guy he was, and up until he died, it never ended till Pete finally closed the club. And, then Pete, of course, didn't have that much control over a lot of things. So, I will stop Pete. You got to stop. There's a family here. His family's got to be taken care of. He's incarcerated. He's got to be taken care of. And, and Pete, wasn't a strong boss at all. He was totally weak and wasn't for that position at all. But, that was, we had no alternative at that point.
Well, I want to get into his son. I want to get into his family. I want to get into some other things. Was there ever a time where, we've heard the media, we've even heard you self-proclaim that you were the adopted son of John Sr. We have to admit, I think it's pretty clear he liked you, right? I mean, you almost look like a son of his, essentially.
It's funny. And Capisi was going to run an article, because Capisi would run an article about anything. He wanted to run an article that my mother had an affair with John, which is 100% not true. So, but a lot of people said, would say just what you said. But yes, he was like a father to me, and I loved him as much as I could love my own father. And I believe he loved me as a son. There was no doubt. There was absolutely no doubt. And Yeah, so that's just how it was. And he would introduce me. He would say, Lewis, he's like my son. He's like, and that's how he would introduce me. And that's how that got started. But of course, the various reporters and stuff to suit them would put the spin on it up in the garment center. I didn't need anyone to tell me who I was in the garment center. Everybody knew I represented John Gotti. I didn't have to go around and tell people I'm with John Gotti. You had to be an imbecile if you didn't know I was with John Gotti.
Right. And
What?
you would ultimately make a lot of money down there. Real quick, I'm curious what you think. How much do you think Tommy Gambino was worth?
Well, when Tommy Gambino got indicted, and the Elliot Spitzer opened up the safe, the crime squad guy, who wound up to be a pedophile, they found $100 million in bearer bonds in Tommy Gambino's safe. So, do the math, Jeff. His father was a boss for how many years? 20 years?
Yeah.
Okay. Like John used to say, this guy's got wheelbarrows of money. That's a John expression. Wheelbarrows of money. His father was a boss, and then his father was sick, and Tommy was acting in his stead. Tommy was up in the garment center for 20 years. You're talking hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. That's what this man is worth. Key West, an estate. Key Biscayne, an estate. 85th Street, or whatever it was there. A Peter Terre, magnificent. Picasso's on the wall. Long Island, Lido Beach, beautiful home right on the beach. That's where Tommy and I used to meet sometimes when John would make me send for him, and we'd meet on the beach because John had a place in Lido Beach. John and I had a place there, like a beach, like a cabana house in Lido Beach, and Tommy would walk on the beach, and that's where John and I would meet. Would meet with Tommy, and then once in a while, I'd have Phil Basile send for Al D'Amato, and then we'd meet Al D'Amato on the beach.
I was curious if you tell this story. Tommy died last year. He was quite old. We know that he did a lot of extensive research and helped in like childhood cancer and different medical things. Can you discuss some of the foundations he had? Did you know anything about it?
Well, when Tommy was very close to a guy by the name of Irving Schneider. Irving Schneider was partners with Harry Helmsley, just to show you the circle, how it worked here.
Yeah.
Tommy had, I would say, 50 to 100 companies in the garment center. He was partners with Bob Mackie. He was partners with Liz Claiborne. He was partners with Ralph Lauren. He didn't skip a beat, Tommy. And he was a shrewd, sharp businessman. Come 5 o'clock, Tommy wasn't a gangster anymore. 5 o'clock, he was with Irving Schneider. Irving Schneider is the biggest contributor to the state of Israel. Biggest. And Tommy started a foundation called the Joel Finkelstein Cancer Foundation. And that was how the money was funneled through from John Gotti, the boss, okay? Tommy contributed money, but we collected money in the garment center through the Joel Finkelstein Foundation, through all the associations and through all the manufacturers. And John was a part of that donation, although John wanted to stay in the background, obviously. But Tommy made the donation of $2 million to the Long Island Jewish Hospital Cancer Foundation. But believe you me, John was every bit a part of that. It was just Tommy was the front guy for that and got the credit for it. But John knew about it and contributed as well to that foundation.
And a lot of you guys contributed too at the Garment District, right?
We all contributed $5,000 each, and there were hundreds of contributions. And it was for a good cause. And Tommy, see, this was all part of Tommy's case. I have to tell you how this all comes to pass. Tommy was sentenced before Judge Ileo Glasser. Judge Glasser is an extremely, extremely religious Jewish man. And Irving Schneider, now picture how Tommy pulled this off. Irving Schneider came to court and wrote letters for Tommy Gambino. Now, Irving Schneider was the largest contributor
to the state of Israel. You go online, there's the Schneider Hospital, all the IDF guys he takes care of, his family. So Judge Glasser knew Irving Schneider very well. So think about this. How does Tommy, and I'm glad he did, and John was happy he did, Tommy got 4 years. Tommy could have got 15 years.
But it was helpful that he knew
It was helpful that Irving came to court and that Tommy gave all this money with the Gambino sanction and with John contributing through the Garment Center to Long Island Jewish. And that had a very strong impact on Judge Glasser. So Tommy did 4 years. It's all who you know. That's right, Jeff. Tommy did 4 years, never did a day more than 4 years, lived till 94, 95, and I'm glad he did. And John loved the guy. John and him became close through the years. That's another conversation. They became very close. And that's a conversation that everybody, it's going to blow your mind.
I got to ask, in 1990, Junior Gotti would get married to his wife, who he's been with ever since. You were pretty integral, and you mentioned Leona Helmsley, her father. You were pretty integral in pulling that wedding off. Tell us more about that.
I made the wedding. I went to John and I said, when I refer to John, I'm talking about the boss. If I refer to Junior, I'll say Junior. When I went to John, I says, we got to make Junior a wedding. I says, not nice. He's getting married and it's the right thing to do. I says, you're not going to be here forever. He went back and forth. John loved his son. Okay. There's no question about it. Don't let anybody say anything different. And Junior wanted to do everything to please his father. But you see, John was a funny guy. The more Junior tried, the more John would push him away. And he was trying to be that son, and John used to say to me, well, why can't he be like you? I says, John, he can't be like me because he's trying to be like you and he's trying to be able to please you. He's not always right, but he tries. And I used to tell him, give him, show him that you care. Show him that, you appreciate, that you do what you do, what he does. And that was a thing. So finally, John agreed. We made the wedding. He said, all right, we'll make it there. So we made the wedding at the Helmsley Palace, and Leona was extremely helpful. But the night before the wedding, well, let me get back into the wedding a bit. So we made the wedding, and John, Jimmy Roselli was there. We had the bands there, and there was just one request John wanted. He says, let Junior, I want to have the wedding with my people on the main ball floor, and let Junior have his friends and his people on the second floor. So, it was okay. I wasn't crazy about it, but we did it that way. And it worked out good because we didn't really have enough room in the main ballroom. So we have the wedding. I called Tony Muscatel because Tony was great with the seating. He knew who hated each other, who should sit with this guy, who should sit with that guy. So 2 days before the wedding, Tony calls me up, 2:00 in the morning. And he says to me, you better come. I said, well, where are you? He says, I'm at the hotel. I says, and the boss is here. I said, well, why is he there? Listen, he says, just get in your car and come because he's looking for you. He's asking for you. He says, and you got to come. I said, all right. I said, Tony, but before I get there, work on all the seating and everything because, I want it done. I want everything perfect. I'm not doing this a mob wedding. Sammy's not walking in with John. None of that's going on. Sammy could walk in off the 15th floor for all I care. John's walking in with Mrs. G, and that's the way it's going to be. And that's the way it went. And, John gave me a little shit for that. But I said to him, John, this is the way it's going to be. Okay? You buried a kid, which was a terrible tragedy. Your wife is finally getting back to herself a little bit. She never was the same. I want you to walk in where it's the right thing to do. And he did it. And you know what? He was glad he did it. He told me. He says, I'm glad. And he was so happy. He was so happy to see Junior walk down that aisle. He was so happy with Kim, and it was I would have to say, it was one of his best days, seeing his son get married. And the respect that every family in New York showed John and showed Junior, showing up at that wedding, even the ones uninvited, showing just to show respect. And that wasn't out of fear. That was out of respect.
Right.
And that's the kind of boss he was.
I got to ask you.
Anybody? Go ahead.
Real quick on the wedding, and then we'll get into some other things. What did you give Junior gift-wise?
I gave him $10,000, $10,036. 36 in Jewish is good luck. And Junior always used to say to me, what does that mean? What's the $36 for? I says, it's good luck. It means high, how you say it with that. So I says, that's what it means. And he always used to break my balls about that.
And who didn't give a big gift that you were surprised about? Do you know? Like, who was cheap?
See, nobody. But let me say this to you. I was smart enough to know, because I know how Junior operates. When the gifts were being collected, I had Tommy Gambino with me. I said, there's no way that I am getting involved with these gifts unless you're here. And that's how we paid for the wedding. We used the gifts. And I had Tommy there counting the money and giving the money to the manager of the hotel. And we didn't, obviously, we didn't pay for the wedding after the wedding like most people. You know, I called up Mrs. H and I said, she says, you come whenever you want to come. She says, I'm not worried one bit. And I went 3, 4, 5 days later with Tommy, and that's how we paid for the wedding. And yeah, so that's what happened. And then, of course, Junior.
Is it true that the FBI attempted to get waiters and stuff in there?
They tried everything, and it's funny. When they threw me in the when they threw everybody in the grand jury, you know, they subpoenaed Leona, they subpoenaed everybody, and the first questions they asked them, why couldn't we get anybody in? They tried to find the room John was in. I booked 10 rooms in John's name and my name. I did it on purpose because I wanted them to figure it out, and they couldn't figure it out. And that was in fact, when they put me in the grand jury and where all the shit that went on with me, that was the first things they would ask me. How did you pull that off? How did I pull it off? I hired 30 off-duty New York City police officers. I hired all Leona's bodyguards. I had the place locked down for a week before the wedding. Nobody was getting in there. And you know what? There was no recordings. There was nothing. All they were able to get was from public areas, was pictures. Photos. That's all they could get. Right. Yep, photos, correct.
Let me ask you, you obviously talk very glowingly about John still to this day. Was there ever a time where you got into like a major argument with him? What was that about? Like, was he ever very pissed off at you? Because look, we know that he would occasionally get pissed off at his son or someone in the family. Did he ever get annoyed with you where you had a blow up?
Yeah, he got annoyed with me over one situation, and it had to do with Tommy and with someone else that's deceased. No need to. I don't want to discuss that at this point. And you know, we went back and forth with it, you know, John and I, and that was really our own disagreement in it. And what happened was, we were scheduled to go out to Gurney's, and I refused to go. I said, you know what, I want to rest. You know, he just looked at me with surprise, because I went with John on all his vacations, Florida, Gurney's, wherever we would go, the Hamptons. And so I didn't go. And, you know, he was beeping me back then. We didn't really have good cell phones. We had those big Motorola's, and they weren't anywhere good. So I called him back, and I says, you know, all right, you know, let me just relax a little bit. And I was really uptight about it. I was really very disappointed. And so at 1 o'clock in the morning, my doorbell rings, and, you know, my house was all cameraed up. You know, John did everything. He put out every kind of contraption you could put in the house. John put in for me. And so I see Jackie Nose and Mikey Scars. So I go downstairs in my shorts, and what's up? So Jackie says, listen, you got to stop fighting with him. Go upstairs, get dressed, get in the car. Either you're going to get in the car, or we're going to put you in the car, and you're going out to Gurney's with us, because you have to do this. So I got in the car, I go out there, and I said, so where's John? He's in the room. I says, all right, so go get him up. Jackie says, I'm not knocking on the door. Mikey Scott says, I'm not knocking on the door. You go knock on the door. They couldn't knock on the door. I had to knock on the door. I go knock on the door. So he looks and he smiles. He comes to the door with his black socks up to his knees. So I said, Grandpa, that's like, you can't dress like that. You don't wear black socks up to your knees. And he laughed. You know, of course, he liked that. So we went in the bar at Gurney's, and you know, and Mikey Scars will tell you, give him, you know, he loved his martinis, and we sat. I don't know where anybody could put the martinis. He was, you know, he was a good drinker. I had two martinis, and I was dead already. I didn't know who I was anymore. So yeah, so we hung out, and I stayed there what was to be a week. He says, "Come on, we'll stay a week." And Peter was there. He was young then. Mrs. G was there. We wound up staying there 2 weeks, and yeah, so it was nice. And it's funny. The name of the
We got you muted, Lewis. Lewis is getting calls coming in. You're muted, Lewis. And we apologize for the technical issues. Sometimes technology is fickle, Lewis. Okay, so you know, obviously by this point, we're into kind of the late '80s, early '90s. You're very connected in the family. You're very close to the actual Gotti family. You also mentioned you were staying over at the home. You were very close with the family. You would ultimately be indicted in 1994. What happened there?
I was indicted for perjury. The government asked me, and obviously it was a setup. The government asked me if I knew who the boss was, and if I knew who Jackie D'Amico was, if I knew he was a captain. So I responded. I said, I know what the media tells me. I mean, obviously they wanted to indict me because, think about this. They didn't need me. This was before, you know, this was all the trial stuff. They didn't need me to tell them who the boss of the Gambino family was and who Jackie knows was. So they basically set me up because I was doing too much for John. They didn't like it. And when I would talk about John, they didn't like it because here was a guy not in the life, just close to John, speaking about him, the real him, not the government spin on him. And I'm not, listen, he was no priest. He was no rabbi. If you were in that life and you did wrong, you paid. You got punished. But innocence did not get punished. So if you wanted to be in business or if you wanted to do something, do it right, be honorable, give him his cut. That's what he didn't want. $1 more. We were in business, Jeff. At the end of the month, I'd show him the printout, what we made, what came in. If it was $1, he would say to me, Lewis, you take 50 cents, I'll take 50 cents.
I got to ask you though, Lewis. Hold on. I got to ask you, and I think people listen to this and understand what you're saying. But I mean, John Favaro was innocent, Lewis.
No, John Favaro wasn't innocent. John Favaro wasn't innocent. Let's.
I mean, it was an accident. He didn't mean to. He didn't mean to do what he did.
Let me straighten that out once and for all. Yes, it was an accident. He was told, sell your house and leave.
But why? Why should he leave?
He knew who John Gotti was.
What does that? But Lewis, hold on. He was. Sadly, accidents happen all the time. People don't have to move because of it.
But why do you drive your car past the house? Why was he taunting Mrs. Gotti? Why?
Now, obviously, if that's true, that's
it is
deplorable.
True. It is true. Listen, The guy was warned by the police. He was warned by the FBI. He was warned by everybody. Stop your shit. You're not doing the right thing. It was an accident. He was running around like, lay low, get in your car.
If that's true, yeah, and if that's true, that's obviously abhorrent for sure. It
is true. It is true. Okay, because John didn't want to harm this guy. This guy wouldn't stop. He would drive the same car that he hit Frankie with past Mrs. G's house. Who does that?
So you believe John Gotti was involved with getting rid of him?
I don't know whether he was or he wasn't.
You would assume.
I don't want to talk. Listen. This guy Favaro, he was a sick guy. There was no reason for him not to get out of the neighborhood. He knew John Gotti was a gangster. He killed a gangster's kid. It was an accident. Okay, we know that. And John knew it was. He didn't go out to kill Frankie deliberately. It was an accident. But you don't pass by the house continuously. You don't do all these different things that this man was doing. He was taunting. You don't do that.
So you would think.
Leave.
So you think he deserved it?
I don't say, listen, I don't say he deserved it or what he deserved, but the guy should have left. The cops told him to leave. The FBI told him to leave. He should have left. And he had no business taunting Mrs. G. Okay.
Sure. No, that would,
She
I would
never
agree.
got over that. You know, my mother buried a child, my brother. Okay. A loss of a child, you don't get over.
Sure.
The pain might get a little less as years go by, but it's always in your heart. Okay. And you don't get over that. You know, if John wasn't a wise guy and this Favaro would have continued to taunt, let's say a legitimate guy, what would the legitimate guy do? Call
No,
911?
and as I said, if that's what John Favaro was doing, then yes, that is deplorable. Again, it's wrong. And
Let me tell you this way. I know for a fact that's what he was doing.
Okay.
And Angelo went to him and told him, stop, get out of town. How many people went because they knew what this outcome was going to be? The guy wouldn't listen. The guy was a scumbag, okay? And he was warned and he was told, and you don't taunt a woman, and he was basically, listen, if you're taunting Mrs. G, you're taunting John, aren't you?
Right. Yeah, it was definitely a move that he should not have done. You would ultimately go to prison over your kind of contempt, perjury involvement. How long did you do in federal prison?
7 months.
Okay. And you were where were you?
I was in the Lewisburg prison camp.
Okay. And by this point, I mean, I don't want to kind of gloss over this. John was already away by this point. I want to go to the night John was arrested, late 1990.
John?
Go ahead.
Okay. No, John, when I was in Lewisburg, John was in Marion.
Sure. Yeah, I want to go back to the night he was arrested in 1990. Where were you? What did you hear?
He was arrested, and the next morning, I had knew he was arrested, and I think Pete called me, or Junior called, whatever, and so I went down there, and there's Frankie, Tommy, John, and a lowlife Sammy, and so John turns to me in front of his very special agent George Gabriel, the very special agent of the FBI. And he turns to me, Lewis, he says, get the car ready, load the trunk up with money. He says, this way, when I get out of here, we're gonna go. So I like, okay. And so I offered to put up his bail, and which the government went crazy. They didn't like it. And I was warned, actually, after all that took place, when I was leaving, one of the agents, actually Gabriel, came up to me and threatened me. He basically said, keep this up, he says, and you're going away too. And, my loyalty was to John, and that's the way it was. And even though I offered to put up the bail, Judge Glasser turned it down because they never thought he was going to get bail, and he wasn't going to get bail, but it was just the point, So Saddam Hussein got bail.
Did you believe? Yeah, right. Did you assume that was the end? You weren't going to see him on the street again? You kind of knew, right? Or did you have a belief that he would get off again?
I had a belief, half of my mind, I had a belief that he would get off again. And at that point, a lot of things were taking place. And, Junior and I would talk about it a lot. And it's funny, when John got locked up for that last case, John and I, Junior and I, got closer because we were going on the visits together. We would be together a lot, talking, strategy or this or that. And, John was very involved and wanted to be involved, Junior. And again, he tried, he wanted, and, John would defer to me. And, that was hurtful to Junior. But it was okay. We worked it out. We figured it out. And I said to John, because I was going on the visits, this was in the MCC, and I said to John, I says, Sammy's going to cooperate. And John looked at me and says, you're out of your mind. I says, okay. I says, I'm telling you, Gravano's going to cooperate. And, Junior said, you shouldn't have told him that. Whatever. So
why did you tell him that?
Because I felt that feeling. I saw the way Gravano looked at John when we were in lockup, and I saw the way Gravano looked at me. He looked at John with such hate and jealousy, but like Gravano is I don't know how to describe him. He's a sick, demented animal. That's the only way to describe him.
You
He is
told
a
me
low
you believe he was the informant that told them about the Ravenite. Do you believe that?
Well, let's get it. You want to get into that now?
Yeah.
Okay. What underboss or consigliere, I don't know, his title changed so often, takes a boss to have a conversation in the upstairs of the Ravenite, where you know that they're trying to get in. My belief and Junior's belief, Sammy set him up because he knew John would talk. When you're in, listen, oh, John talked, he did it to himself. Bullshit. When you're in the privacy and you're with your boss and consigliere and you're in a room, you would assume before you bring your boss into that room is swept, that room is controlled. You know who was up there for the last week. None of that was done because Sammy controlled Frankie Lowe. Loved Frankie Lowe, but Sammy controlled him. So they go up there. And that was an argument I had with John too. I said, you got to stop going up there. Don't go up there anymore. So I went to Joe Butch, who really loved John. And me and him were very close, Joe Butch. And I said, you got to stop him from going up there. It's got to stop. And ultimately we did stop it. And then Sammy used to make him go in the hallway. So we went from the Cirilli apartment to the hallway. And that ultimately, I was there one day and I said to John, you got to stop. You cannot go into the hallway. But this was Sammy. Sammy was awkward. Sammy was planning this. Sammy didn't wake up one day and say to the telephone operator in the MCC, oh, would you connect me with George Gabriel and Bruce Mao with the FBI? Because remember, Junior had everybody on the payroll in MCC. We knew every call Gravano was making.
So you believe
planned.
So you believe he was bad, before they got arrested?
I believe Sammy had this planned.
Okay.
I believe he had it planned. I believe communication took place through his wife, because his wife was the conduit. His wife used to visit him all the time.
Well, we actually know that. We had Gleason on the show, and he essentially confirmed that it was her.
It was her. But what about Eddie Garofalo? What about Big Louie? These guys were directly in his crew. They were still earning. Sammy was still getting money. So again, the truth be told, you got all these YouTubers, they talk nothing. They don't. A-Light. When did A-Light become a made guy? When did A-Light become anything? A-Light was about Junior.
Yeah, I'll ask you about him and a few others in a second. And listen, Lewis, this is, I'll tell the listeners, this isn't the only time we're going to have you on. I get a feeling we're going to be doing some other things with you, and there's a lot of things we can delve into. But I want to kind of keep this to John Sr.
Okay.
He would ultimately go to Marion. Did you ever go see him in Marion?
I went to Marion every time Junior went on a visit. It was me, Junior, and Johnny Boy Ruggiero. And I would attempt to go in. And the warden came out and told me, you're a threat to institutional security. Leave the grounds or we're going to arrest you. Wow. But I went every month with Junior till Junior got locked up. We used to land at an airport and then have to drive 2.5 hours or 3 hours to Marion.
Yeah, Marion's in the middle of nowhere, right?
It's the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, sure. What's I think sometimes, Lewis, in life, we don't ever think about the last time we do things, right? I kind of think back to my own father. What was the last conversation I had with him? Do you remember the last conversation you had with Senior?
Yes. Now we're going to fast forward from Marion. Now keep in mind, in Marion, he had the cancer, and they were giving him Tylenol for cancer. For cancer, head
Insane.
cancer. And just so you know, the guy that was the PA or the EMT at Marion was also owned the funeral home in Marion. So this is the mentality of that warden. And by the way, your listeners should know, John Gotti had a concierge warden. Like you go to a concierge doctor today. Well, John Gotti had a concierge warden. His name was Bill Hedrick. And you know what Bill Hedrick was? Bill Hedrick was John Ashcroft's dear friend. They both went to the same church in Springfield, Missouri.
And he was the attorney
Bill
general.
Hedrick, that's correct. Bill Hedrick follows John from his first day in Marion until his last day in Marion, and then when they shipped him to Springfield, Missouri, to what they call a hospital. The hospitals are better in Iraq than that hospital. So so they ship him there, and he was doing very bad. He had the head cancer, the neck cancer, the throat cancer, and at this point in time, I had retained Harvard law professor Charles J. Ogletree, Jr. Great guy, loved John. I don't know if you know about Ogletree. Ogletree's best friend and he was their teacher was Michelle Obama and President Obama. And Ogletree had direct access to everybody. I was in his office. I saw him pick up the phone and talk to Obama, talk to the Secretary of Defense. He had access to everybody. So he picked up the phone, and Pete and I were there. He called the director of the Bureau of Prisons, Kathleen Hawk Sawyer. And he told her, this is what's going on. He had everybody's phone number, Ogletree. You would sit in his office. It was like Pete and I would just look at each other. That's another story. Pete and I go to Harvard, Harvard School to meet Ogletree. And Ogletree told her.
You're talking about the son, Peter, obviously.
No. This was when Uncle Pete was around.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So we go to Harvard. All right. So fast forward, we go to Harvard. We meet with Ogletree. Ogletree agrees to represent us, represent John. Picks up the phone. He calls the director of the BOP. He says, I want this man to have medical treatment. I want this. And I want it today, not tomorrow, today. So it put them in check for a little bit, but nothing really changed. But they were fearful because they know now we had access. And Ogletree gave me Eric Holder's private phone number. He says, listen, Lewis, you have a way. Call up Ogletree. We'll do a conference call. You tell Ogletree what's going on. I'm sorry, you tell Eric Holder, who was the AG at the time, what's going on. He was at the end of the Clinton administration. And Hillary Clinton got involved. She thought that how John was treated was terrible. And of course, John didn't like what I was doing at this point. John didn't. He says, I want to go out the way I want to go out. He says, you got to stop. He would fight me all the time. No. But I didn't stop. And Angel didn't stop. And Vicky didn't stop. But they all did what they could do. And we started to get more medical treatment, but it wasn't enough. This guy, he had everything wrong. They had him on a morphine drip at this point, and it was just bad. So I found out what church Bill Hedrick and Ashcroft could go to, because you got to understand, Springfield's a very big religion town. So I find out the church that they go to, and I go to church, and I sit in the pew behind Ashcroft and his buddy there, the warden there, the concierge warden we had, Bill Hedrick. And I looked at them after we were all leaving. They didn't even know I was there till I tapped Hedrick on the shoulder. He couldn't believe I was there. I says, you come to church and you pray and you treat John the way you treat him? I says, how do you sit here? How do you pray? What God are you praying to? That was it. I walked out, and I found out, I said to, now Peter was with me at this time, his son, young Peter, John's son. John loved Peter, and you never could find a more devoted son than Peter. Peter lived there for maybe a year, 8 months, in a hotel room with a fish tank. That was what Peter did, to be with his father on every available visit from morning till night. However long they would let him stay, Peter stayed there. So I find out about this lawyer. His name was D. Wampler. D. Wampler was like, I want to say, like the Jerry Shogell of Springfield. He was the connected guy. Right. He was the guy, if you got in trouble in Springfield, you went to D. Wampler. He's now deceased. And I go to D. Wampler, and I said, D, this is what I want. I want to do a writ, and I want John to get a writ. I want to writ him out of the Federal Medical Center in Springfield, and I want to writ him to the best hospital in Springfield. Now, keep in mind, Springfield had the best hospitals. So there was no reason for John Gotti to get treatment in that hellhole. No reason. A man on a morphine drip that he had to push the button himself. And you know what they used to do? They would tell him they put morphine in, and they never put it in. I would be on the phone, and I hear him pushing the button.
So they treated him very
Here we're
poorly.
pushing the button. Okay. And he never complained. I was the complainer. Angel was the complainer. Vicky was the complainer.
Right.
He never complained. So,
well, listen, there's no one that should live like that. I mean, especially with cancer. You know, again, he still is a human being. They definitely treated John Gotti pretty. I mean, even putting him in Marion is, you know, I heard there was talk to put him in ADX at one point.
well, here at Marion, Jeff, is a 3-step program. John was at the end of the 3-step program. No complaints, no beefs, no nothing. So that's where that guy, they bring that guy in, the FBI and that warden bring that guy in to make a scene with John. And once there was that scene, John couldn't be shipped out of Marion.
Hold
They
on
were
a
gonna
second.
ship John.
So, wait, hold on a second. So, you're talking about Walter Johnson, right?
Correct.
Okay. Now, I've gotten a lot of
Walter-
stick. I've got a lot of stick from the family. They say that never happened.
Well,
I know for a
it
fact
did happen.
it happened.
Okay, Jeff,
Go ahead.
it did happen. However, it was the government that made it happen.
So you're saying
They
the
put
government instructed Mr. Johnson to assault John Gotti?
Yes, they put him in Marion in the dead of night. John, how come all the years he was in Marion, he was never in the yard? He was always in the yard with cops. John was never always with law enforcement, always with a BOP security guards, 2 of them plus a lieutenant. How come on that day? Where were the guards that day?
Yeah, listen, I don't put it past the BOP to do that. I mean, we've seen several other conspiracies that we don't think are quite conspiracies. No, that makes a lot of sense. We can't obviously be on it forever, so I kind of want to move along a little bit here, and we'll have you back on to talk about some of this stuff more in depth. John Gotti would obviously pass away in June of 2002. You, I believe, were involved with Peter in bringing the body home. Is that correct?
Young Peter, John's son, had called me. He says, Lewis, I don't think we have much time. And I was planning a trip down. He says, you don't have enough time. So I call up the Helmsley group and I get Mrs. H's jet. And they fly me and Johnny Boy go on the jet out of MacArthur Airport on Long Island. And we fly down to Springfield. We land in Springfield. And so we got there and John was still alive. I went to the tower to Bill Hedrick and I said, hey, Hedrick, the man's going to die. I want to see him. He says, Kasman, I wouldn't let you see him under any circumstances. And if you don't leave the property of the medical center right now, I'm arresting you. So I said to Peter, you go in and see him. No fight we could win here right now. No fight we could win here right now. So shortly thereafter, John passes away, and the BOP is still jerking us around. We agreed with Hedrick there'll be no autopsy. And Hedrick, of course, lied to us. The FBI got involved, and they did do an autopsy. And at the time that they did the autopsy, we came to learn that they took John's brain. And again, we were assured by the government that they would not do this. And but they did do this. They did an autopsy, and they removed his brain. And we finally, after I held a press conference down there, and I went after them because they wouldn't release the body. I said to Hedrick, "You're not his warden anymore. He's gone. You killed him. It's over. Get a life now. Go back to your friend Ashcroft. See who else you could torture. It's over." Finally, we get the body. And we go to I said to Peter, I want to go to the funeral parlor. Let's have our own little service at the funeral parlor. So at the funeral director, we set everything up nice. And the funeral director comes over to Peter and me. He says, I want to show you your father's skull and how they took the brain. He says, I had no choice. He says that this is what they directed me to do. And we saw all of that. And Peter flipped out. It was not good. It was disgusting what they did. Disgusting. So Peter and I sat there, it was emotional. So then the warden says, he gets involved again. He wouldn't let us fly on the plane unless we had the funeral director with us. Now, picture this. John is gone. He's no longer an inmate. He's no longer 18261-053. He's no longer that number anymore. That was his inmate number, 18261-053. 053 is the Eastern District of New York. He was no longer that number. Now he belonged to us. Nope. I call up Papa Vero and I say, you got to fly down. I said, get an ambulance jet because they're going to give us a hard time. So he gets an ambulance jet. He comes down. He sits in the back of the plane. Peter sits next to me, and they bring John on. So I said, Peter, let John, put Dad next to you. He says, Lewis, put Dad next to you. Put him on your lap. I sat with John, his head on my lap, from the time we left Springfield till the time we landed at MacArthur Airport.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the last time I saw him. Alive, dead.
You would then
dead. He was. I'm sorry.
I understand. You would then speak. You would deliver the eulogy at the funeral. You would read the statements from the kids. We obviously have seen photos. I mean, there were onlookers there. There, random people just to see what was going on. Is it true the Catholic Church would not give him a funeral?
Well, it's another story. John and I developed a friendship. More me at this point, because John was a big believer in all that stuff, with Cardinal O'Connor, who had a 99-year lease with Leona Helmsley. So he used to park his car where John and I used to park the car at the Helmsley Palace. So we would always see the Cardinal. So I went, Cardinal was gone at this time, by the way. So I went to the church where John would donate money to. They needed pews, bring him 50,000 in Howard Beach. They needed this, bring him 10,000. I went to that parish priest and I says, listen, why don't you give back all the money? I gave you 50,000 for chairs a month ago. Give it back.
Right.
He says, Lewis, if I could, I would.
So they basically took his money but wouldn't give him a funeral.
But ultimately, we gave him a funeral. Ultimately, it came to pass.
Right.
After Peter and myself, we made it happen. And
so, I mean, we've.
Oh, and by the way, I want to clear something up with my sister Angel. I was not wired during the funeral. I didn't do nothing with the government during the funeral. So my sweet little sister, who I love, has to stop all these stories.
Okay.
It never took place.
Lewis, this is the tough part of this conversation that we got to get into. And you brought up Angel. She's referred to you at one point as Judas. What do you make of that?
You know what? I understand where she's coming from, because in her mind, it's a betrayal. It wasn't a betrayal. It wasn't a betrayal. Did I ever testify against Junior? No. Were they ever going to call me? No. Would I have ever testified? No. Did they rip up my agreement 5 times? Do you have to be a genius to figure this out? So give me a break. Anybody?
So you're saying they ripped up your agreement because you wouldn't testify against Junior Gotti, right?
They threatened me every day. Listen to me. The FBI during those days, they give you a script to read. The public doesn't understand. And John used to say this to me. The mafia is bad, but the FBI is worse, because they got a gun and they got a badge and they do what they want. There's no remedies to the FBI. There's no, who are you going to complain to? Who are you going to go to? Just look at the FBI now. Look at their current reputation.
Right. Yeah, it's not.
You know what? Everything John Gotti Sr. said about the FBI, he was right on the money. Right on.
Did you?
So, Angel, my sister wants to talk about all this stuff, and I love her. I got a kick out of her online. She wouldn't be on YouTube if John Sr. was alive. That with all this nonsense that they do would not go on. But okay, she wants to do this and she loves her father, but that's not her father's way. And that's not her father's wishes. Shut down that site, Angel. It's wrong.
Did you wear a wire?
Not with any of the Gottis. And they talk about the situation with Mrs. G. You got to remember, I love that lady. That lady, we used to have dinner together, me and her. I loved her. And I was there I did whatever I could do to make her life better. And she was very good to me. She was my confidant, and I was her confidant when John was gone, and
right.
When John was incarcerated. I was in that house constantly. I would he would call the house. They'd answer the phone, and he'd say, "Put Lewis on." And I used to tell him, "John, you got to stop that." That's why he would create this. John loved that Machiavellian stuff. He would create this stuff. I said, you got to stop that. Talk to everybody. You know, so I would hand the phone back to her. She'd hand the phone back to me. It became funny after a while. So yeah.
So, and what
but
you're referring to is between 2005 and 2007, an FBI agent would testify, according to him, that you were paid approximately $12,000 a month and about $144,000 annually. And they contend that at one point you sat in a kitchen of her home and wore a wire as she told you stories.
No, let's clarify that so my sister Angel could hear it. The conversation took place in Vicky's mansion in Westbury.
Right.
Okay. It's not a wire, first of all. Okay. They have all souped up stuff that you can't believe. There's no wires. There's none of that stuff. And the wire went dead. I'm not going to go any further. The wire went dead. There was a beginning. There was a snippet. Let me finish, Jeff. There was a snippet of conversation, and then the wire somehow went off. I don't know how it went off, but it went off. So my sister Angel needs to stop the lies and stop all the bullshit.
But then again, it's not really lies, though. I mean, you did wear a wire. And again, it is what it is.
Nothing was said. Nothing was recorded. I would never do it. It never happened that way. It was a hello and a goodbye, and the wire went dead. I don't know how the wire went dead, but the wire. And you know what? Get the tapes. Let's get the tapes. Angel knows. Angels are very creative all of a sudden. Let her get the tapes.
Okay, fair enough.
I have the tapes.
And you know, you've issued that challenge. I guess we'll have to maybe see if we can't get them if they exist. A lot of people are going to ask.
Oh, they exist.
Okay, so you are someone who did cooperate against someone. Who was it? Who did you cooperate against?
To get the record straight, there were no wires with me on Junior. Never anything with Senior. Never. I would have killed myself first. I loved that man, and he loved me. Never. I was his best friend, and he was my best friend. So people could say what they want. I know the truth. Junior knows the truth. Junior and I know the truth about a lot of things that people say. And through all that time, I was his biggest supporter. So, you know, I get agitated. I get aggravated because that's why I want to set the record straight. Because these tubers, these other people that talk, this John Gleason, could you imagine a former federal judge working for a white shoe law firm now, goes on YouTube to tell about the fact that his uncle was related to his Gleason had an uncle, a white guy, and never disclosed. He
actually told us that. He told us that.
He's a former federal judge.
Right.
Get a life. Gleason was a scumbag from the beginning till the end. We got to get into that because I got all the goods on Gleason.
Who did you testify against, Lewis?
One person.
Who was it?
One person. His name was Vinny Artuso, the guy that claimed the guy that claimed his gun jammed during the Castellano hit. Imagine you take a wise guy with you to do a hit, and he tells everybody my gun jammed.
Why'd you testify against him?
He was attempting to extort money from me. I opened up a restaurant in Florida called Campagnola, and Artuso he ingratiated himself to me, and I told him, I says, Vinny, thank you, but I don't need to be around anybody. I'm with the administration, or I'm with Pete, or I'm with Junior. Arnold reached out to me. Scuteri says, Lewis, you're with us. You have carte blanche. You do whatever you want. No one's going to approach you. No one's going to come near you. And this Artuso had no respect for nobody, not for the administration, certainly not for John, because John didn't like him, and he didn't like John. So he tried to pull his shit on me. He gave me gave me $250,000. He says, hey, could you launder this for me? I says, no. I said, I don't do that. He says, why can't you do for me what you did for your friend John? I says, because you're not John, and you're not my friend. I says, does that make it easy for you, Vinny? So then he started to come to the restaurant. He would eat, and he wouldn't pay the bills. So I go see Danny Marino, because Danny was in Florida a lot. I said, Danny, you got to do me a favor. I don't want this guy in the place no more. And he was supposedly the Gambino for Florida, South Florida. I don't want him here no more. He don't pay. I don't need him. It's not right. He's not disrespecting me. I'm around a boss. I represent the boss, whether he's alive, dead, married, or not. And now I'm with the administration. I don't want this guy in anymore. I'll take care of it. He owed us about $1,000. It wasn't the money. It was the disrespect.
Right.
And it was the fact that I felt that he was disrespecting, and he was disrespecting John. You know, you don't do that to someone like John. He died for this, okay? He died, lived like a dog in those jails. Saddam Hussein, you made the guy Pollard, the spy for Israel. They got better treatment than John Gotti.
So you're saying you welcomed you just hated Artuso, basically.
The guy, everybody hated him. He was just a terrible, terrible person, and he paid the bill. He never came around again, and that was the end of it. I never took his money. I gave him his money back. He said, "I'm going to take over the restaurant." I said, "You're not taking over no restaurant." And it's funny. It's funny. I have to say, Peter and Big Steve came to see me. They said, "Don't open up this restaurant with this Carlo Vaccarezza." They flew down special to tell me, because Junior sent the message. He says, "Why are you opening up this restaurant with this scumbag Vaccarezza?" Well, another story. But in any event, John Jr. was right about Vaccarezza. I never should have done it. Ultimately, I sold it and got out, and that was the end of it. And I love Peter for the fact, and Big Steve, that they came to warn me, and I should have taken their warning that don't do nothing with this Vaccarezza. And Vaccarezza is the one that brought Artuso around.
Right.
So
Okay.
lo and behold, Artuso gets convicted. He goes up on appeal. He gets affirmed, and I don't know where he is. I don't care where he is.
He actually passed away.
Well, couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I don't think the Gambinos would have anything to do with him.
What I want to kind of move on, kind of look towards ending this, but I have some things I want to ask you before we end.
Okay.
So you're saying you never wore anything against the family. You would never do that. Do you miss the family?
Never.
How do you feel about them?
Never, ever. Never, ever. And the government knew that. Never, ever, ever.
Okay. I want to put some people on the screen, and I want you to just kind of tell me your first thoughts on them. You know, guys you knew in the streets. What about this guy?
Listen, the guy killed his brother-in-law, chopped him up, and buried him in the backyard. And the dog one day was digging in the backyard. They were having a barbecue, and he took the guy's arm out with the ring on it, and his wife saw it. He's demented. He's bad. There's some people that are just born bad. He's bad. He's bad. He's a sick animal.
Okay. What about him?
Mikey Scars. John loved him. Great guy. He was a tremendous asset and help to Junior, and Junior would never refute that. And it's unfortunate because Mikey would have never flipped. He flipped because Uncle Pete, my uncle, my brilliant uncle, he flipped because they wouldn't get him a lawyer. They put him on a shelf. They took his money and they left him in MCC to rot. So what do you want the guy to do?
Right. What do you think of obviously you watch some of this YouTube stuff. They have him and Sammy have a pretty big feud on here. Are you kind of agree with Mikey? He's kind of righting the wrongs as well, trying to tell him the right story.
Listen, if anybody knows, Mikey knows. Scars knows. Scars was he was close to Senior. John Jr. loved him, and he loved John Jr. And John Jr. was successful during those years because of Mikey Scars. Mikey Scars kept Jr. focused. You know, it's a big burden Jr. had on his shoulders. Big burden, huge.
Sure. What about this guy?
That's Joe Butch, best guy. Loved John, and he gave me the best advice. Do everything you got to do now, because you see all these captains, you see all these guys how they are. They won't be that way once he's not around no more. Right. And
Wow.
He was a guy I used to turn to for advice.
It's good foreshadowing, really, for you.
He was a special man. That's Joe Watts. He bought his way through Castellano, and unfortunately, he bought his way through John. And that was one of our arguments. One of our many
Recently,
arguments, Joe Watts.
Recently, it's been contended that Joe Watts possibly was an informant. Do you believe that?
That was a rumor that was going around, but you got to remember, Joe has a lot of bodies, so he should be a lifer. So again, that speaks for itself. Do I know positively? No. Do I have my own thoughts on it? Yeah. And John didn't have nothing to do with him the last year or two. John was done with him. That's my friend Jackie Knows D'Amico. Good guy.
He passed away recently.
I know. I had dinner with him a while back. And
wait, really?
He's a good guy. Yeah, about 3 years ago.
Really?
And he's a good guy, Jackie. And all I could say, all those 25 skippers, thank God for Jackie D'Amico. That's all I could say. Every one of those skippers, Jimmy Brown, you name them all. Thank God for Jackie D'Amico, that he was able to be with John.
Wow.
That's all I tell you. He's a good Jackie. All I could say is thank God for D'Amico.
All right, few more here.
That's Junior, my brother Junior.
Do you think he's an informant?
No, absolutely not.
You don't think sitting down with the
Junior,
government is a informant move?
Listen, I know all about all that.
What would John Sr. think of it?
Well, you didn't let me answer first. First of all, I don't think that he cooperated. He just wasn't built that way. Yeah, John.
Well, he did though. There's a 5-page proffer section.
You know what? I have to see it. I don't know if it's true. You got to remember, the government can make up proffers. The government can make up 302.
He's actually,
remember.
Hold on a second.
I saw it. I know what the government can do.
He's actually admitted to it though. He said it was a lapse.
You know what? Listen, if he did it and he said it was a lapse, I don't know. I find it hard to believe. I would want to see those documents in front of me.
Okay.
I would.
Maybe sometime we'll go through them.
Yep.
Maybe we'll go through them sometime. I'll just ask you though, what would Senior think of it if, let's say, he did?
Oh, if he did that, he would not be his son anymore. That would be over.
Okay. Yep. What about this guy?
Oh, that's the tough guy. That's the mafia guy, John A.
You're not a fan of his?
Listen, without Junior Gotti, where would he be? He makes up all these stories. He did this, he did that. I don't know. I saw him at the house a few times because Junior was close to him, but Senior had nothing to do with him. He was around. In a fight. Well, he was around Junior. He had a fight one day at Channel 80. My friend Philly Basile's place, and Junior was there, and they had a fight there. And Philly was around Paul Vario, and Paul Vario and John Senior were close. So he lost his bracelet, John A. And Junior was there, and so the next day Junior calls me up. He says, "Do me a favor, can you have the cleaning crew look for A-Light's bracelet?" So I said, "Yeah, you guys went to this place. You had a fight." I said, "You're gonna get grief from your father. The guys around Vario. I know Lewis. I know whatever." And so John went off on Junior at that point with regard to that incident. Well, ironically, we did find A-Light's bracelet. Yeah, we found his bracelet.
So that was
and
good.
We gave it back to him.
Yeah. Well, Lewis, obviously we're going to speak to you again. I think we can do some things down the road. You're a fascinating guy. You have one of these. I was thinking this morning about you, about how you have this insane story, like of your life. You're 67 years old now.
It's crazy.
Everybody is, most of the people that you interacted with on a daily basis are gone. Some are people that cooperated, but most of them are gone. All these old guys are gone. And I'd be curious to I think there's some cool things we could do with you as far as just kind of getting into some other stories. Obviously the government's wrought with corruption, and we can see that you have this romanticism towards Gotti, similar to the family, and you have this feel of him. I guess I'll ask you this final question. What do you miss most about John Gotti? What do you kind of leave what is his lasting legacy with you, at least?
I miss him. I miss the person he was. I miss for what he stood for. I'm not delusional. He was a tough guy. He was a mobster. He was a gangster. He was the boss. But I knew him, how he was as a human being and how he was as a person and how he loved people and how he wanted to take care of people and how he wanted to help people. That's the John Gotti I know. And that's really the real John Gotti. That's really the real John Gotti. That he had a very big heart. Like I said to you many times already, Jeff, if you were in his life and you were in that life and you stole and you robbed, there was a penalty. That's who he was. He wasn't a thief. He wasn't a pig to take everybody's money, a greedy guy. He was a very greedy. I used to tell him, John, do you hate money? You know,
We've heard
and he used to
Judas say
laugh.
that too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. You know, these are all true things about this.
Why
man.
did I actually lied. I have one more question. Why did you? We have heard you were gonna do an interview with other people. Why did you decide to come on this channel? Why did you decide to tell your story?
Well, I wanted to do. I was talking to Jimmy Calandra, and I like him. You know, good guy. Everybody's got what they got going on. And then I started to, you know, I never a YouTube guy, and I started to listen to you. I like the way you approach it. You ask the questions and you get the answers. You're not telling the answers. It's not your opinion. You're just letting people voice their opinion. And that's their opinion. Like you say, hey, this is how this, you know, and everything I tell you, see the good thing with me, everything I tell you could be verified. You call any wise guy. Listen, were the wise guys jealous of Lewis Kasman? Yeah, they were jealous. Why? Kasman had Gotti's ear 24/7. You know, I had the private phone number in the house. Not you, me.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody
access.
that argue with that.
I had 24 access. I could go in the house when he was sleeping and wake him up. You couldn't. Wise guys couldn't. You know, so they were jealous. And you know what? I guess I'm old now already, so maybe they had a reason to be jealous. But they didn't take care of John Gotti the way I did, the way Junior did. They didn't take care of him. We took care of him.
Right. Well, listen, Lewis, fascinating. Again, look forward to speaking to you in the future. I think a lot of people are going to be watching this. I think a lot of people are going to have their questions. And listen, what we're going to do in the future, maybe over the next week or so, I want to get you back on. We're going to do a live stream. We're going to answer some questions that people have from you. You know, maybe we'll delve deeper into some things. I really appreciate you coming on, Lewis.
Okay, thank you for having me. And it's all about setting the record straight, Jeff.
Yeah, I know that, and you've always made that clear to me. So I appreciate it. And do me a favor, hang on here. I want to talk to you after we end this. Thanks everybody for watching. This has been episode 156 of the Sit Down. Thanks everybody for checking out the show. Make sure you hit that like button, and yeah, we'll see you next week here on the Sit Down.